Greetings, Ohio Valley. This is Dan Lima with OSU Extension from Belmont County.
And this is Karen Cox from WVU Extension in Ohio County. Thanks for tuning in to Extension Calling, your source for research-based information for the farm, garden, and home. Dan and I are going to be out of the studio for a while, and so we wanted to keep the show going by bringing back some previously recorded episodes. This is a show that was originally recorded in 2017, and we hope that you enjoy it.
All right, Karen. So last week we were talking about deer control. We talked about devices and technique designed to scare the deer away. So we did talk about the propane cannons. We talked about physical barriers such as vertical fences versus electric fences. We talked about chemical repellents and how that does work well in light pressures, and how the chemical repellents are going to be variable, but they're going to be probably the most economical way to keep the deer away. We talked about the soaps. We talked about human hair with cologne. But if the deer are used to all these things, there is one thing that the deer really don't get used to, and that's predators, stuff that wants to eat them.
Right, and so what they have done was they have simulated the scent of predators, specifically of coyote, which are in this region. So the smell of blood or the smell of coyote urine also are useful in keeping deer away.
That'll probably keep me away as well.
Yeah, me too. So, those are all different ways to keep deer away from your crops. However, what if coyotes are your problem? So will that deer repellent fence also repel coyotes? And the answer is sort of. So coyotes can be excluded from your pastures by those woven wire fences or those high voltage electric fences. However, it has to be well maintained. The woven wire fence has to have at least a 6-inch mesh and be at least 4.5 feet high. Also, just like a regular dog, a coyote's more likely to go under the fence than over it. So to keep them from digging under the fence, you're going to want to put that charged wire about 1 foot out from the existing fence, about 6 inches off of the ground. Again, throw some peanut butter and foil on that, and you can keep the deer and the coyotes out of your pasture or garden.
Remember that that Penn State fence had a bottom that's electrified, 56 inches high, but that bottom wire was 10 inches. So just modifying that a little bit could also keep the coyotes away.
Yeah, and the 7-strand high tensile fence, that's also going to exclude most coyotes. The bottom wire, again, should be 6 inches above the ground with an 8-inch spacing between the other wires for a total height of 4.5 feet. So that's your typical jumping distance for a coyote. But again, if you are having problems losing calves, lambs, or chickens, these are things that you can do. Again, your coyotes are most active at night. Cool weather, they might be more active throughout the day, but mostly in the evenings. So your dawn dusk is going to apply for coyotes as well as deer. So make sure those fences are on in the evening. Early evening is the best time to turn it on. Late morning, you can turn it off so that you can operate safely around the farm.
Right. So a whole new set of problems for coyotes versus deer problems. And the difference also is that when we talk about lethal measures in terms of, and different states have different difficulties in obtaining these lethal permits for hunting the deer or for killing the deer. The coyote doesn't really require a permit per se, but the deer does. And that's another difference with the coyotes. As long as you're not within the city limits or there's no ordinance or anything in the areas that you live in. And Ohio, I should speak for Ohio more so than West Virginia, you can shoot coyotes and there's no permit required. However, there are permits required for deer lethal measures. And that kind of gets us through all the deer, the deer exclusion or the deer, what am I trying to say here? The deer prevention techniques from damaging your crops, deer damage control, and it kind of touches on some of the coyote ones.
Right. So So there is a discussion out there, though, as to, whether or not you should shoot the coyotes. So if you have a deer problem and a coyote problem, then what should you do? So if you're trying to get a kill permit to get rid of all the coyotes, you may find that causes you more problems in the long run because the coyotes are no longer keeping the deer population in check. And so coyotes are kind of a blessing and a curse because they are a natural predator of deer and they will take down those populations. However, as with any prey-predator balance, you have to have time because your prey population is designed to breed quickly and grow quickly, whereas your predator population grows more slowly and it'll lag behind, right? So some cattle producers have told me that they will not kill a coyote, but instead they will have protector dogs and donkeys. Donkeys are very good at protecting cattle from coyotes as long as they are raised to be protector. You can't just take a random donkey and throw it out in the field and expect it to know what to do. You just need to do a little training with them, make sure that they know that the cows are their friends or the lambs and sheep, and then just keep them together all the time because the glory of that is they are always with the herd. They move with the herd. They transfer from pasture to pasture with the herd. And so that can be very beneficial, but they need to stay out there with them all the time.
Yeah, and then we are talking about different types of operations that are going to have the different types of problems. Obviously, if you're having prey animals that you're raising for food or for eggs or whatever, you're probably going to have a coyote problem. And if you have an orchard, you're probably not going to have a coyote problem. You're going to have a deer problem. So if you have a home garden, more than likely, we're talking deer problems. If you do have backyard chickens, however, the coyote problems will start coming up depending on the situation you have. And a chicken coop is a great physical barrier to keep coyotes away because coyotes are nocturnal and they will hunt at night. Different ways to, and there are other pests right there. I think Karen has one that she's going to introduce to us, and we're going to be like, oh, that's right, those are a problem, and fencing doesn't do well for what, Karen?
For raccoons. Yeah, raccoons breed from late January to mid-March. Young are born about 2 months later. They'll have about 1 litter per year with an average of 3 to 7 young. So the raccoons are going to feed on a variety of animals and plants. So in the spring, they're going to feed on insects and crayfish, things like that, bird eggs, including your chickens and your chicken eggs. And then later on in the summer, they're going to move on to fruit, seeds, nuts, grains, and garden vegetables. So if you're wondering what's been attacking your corn, if the corn stalks are partially broken with the ears partially eaten and the husk pulled back, that is a raccoon. They'll also eat tomatoes and melons. They'll bite a hole in the end, scoop out the inside with their front paws. Some people do just call this groundhog damage, but if it has a little hole in it and it's been scooped out, that's definitely a raccoon. Raccoons are known for their little hands, and they are very, very dexterous and have been known to unlock things. So simple locks will not keep out a raccoon. You really have to use something that can't just be untwisted or pulled on to be opened. Raccoons are very intelligent animals, and they can even reach through cages and attempt to pull birds out through wire mesh, which will in turn kill them.
And you can always get traps from, at least in Ohio, in Belmont County, you can borrow traps from the Soil and Water Office. Now, keep in mind that raccoons are a nuisance species. So what that means is if you trap a raccoon, you're either going to have to kill it on site or release it on site. It's unlawful to take the trap somewhere else and release it out there. So keep that in mind when you're utilizing traps. They are a nuisance species, so they also don't require a permit to kill. Some humane ways to kill a raccoon are to either shoot it, and if you don't have a gun or you're in an area that you can't shoot to kill it, drowning is another humane way to kill a raccoon. And, it just depends on your situation, but they are a nuisance species. So if you do trap one, you either have to kill it on site or release it on site.
Yeah, I think I would rather get an air gun than drown it, for the speed of things. Put it out of its misery more quickly. But anyway, you can also protect it with an electrified wire. Typically, if you have a electric strand 4 to 5 inches off the ground, or 4 to 5 inches outside the wire fence, it'll keep the raccoons from trying to crawl beneath it. Also, you can put another fence on top of, or another electrified wire on top of your woven wire fence to prevent them from crawling over, because they do use those hands and they will grab onto it and get shocked. So that will help keep them out of the field.
All right. So that gets us through deer, raccoons, coyotes, and you got something else for us, don't you?
I do. There's lots of pests out there. All right, so let's talk about those cute little bunnies, right? They're really fun to watch. My dog absolutely really wants to catch them, but we live in suburbia, so my dog is not allowed to catch them. All right, so rabbits prefer large open areas or with brushy fence rows to hide in. They do need a layer of brushy protective cover, so sometimes keeping a mown area just outside your field of probably 20 to 30 feet. I'm not sure on the exactness of that, but that's going to deter a lot of predators, including deer, not predators, but browsers, we'll call them. All right, so because they're going to have that exposed time. So while you may want to plant all the way up to the edge of your field, having that big open area that they have to cross to get into your field may actually reduce the damage that wildlife has on your crop. All right, so rabbit-proof fences for a small garden, they can be inexpensive. Again, on that large garden, you may just want to expand your barrier. When you're building your fence, build it to exclude everything, That way you're not taking out one pest and inviting a couple others. So the fence to keep rabbits out needs to be 18 to 24 inches high, but the bottom of the fence needs to be securely anchored or even buried. And for groundhogs too, you're going to go down into the soil and make an L so that they aren't just going to dig under the fence and get into your crop. So again, a single strand of that electrified wire 4 to 5 inches from the ground will exclude rabbits as well as the raccoons we discussed earlier. And the vegetation in the vicinity of the electric wire needs to be removed regularly. You've got to keep the fence clean so that wire doesn't short out. If you have damage on your tree trunk, so if you have an orchard and the rabbits are chewing off the bark at the base, you can encircle the trees with cylinders of a 1/4-inch hardware cloth, 18 to 24 inches high, and set down into the ground 2 to 3 inches. Again, you do not want to do this with, I keep saying again when I'm saying something first time, I apologize for that. You don't want to do this on established trees, because if you're digging 2 to 3 inches into the ground to insert a fence, that means you are cutting off the roots at 2 to 3 inches into the ground. And that is where, about half, probably 2 to 3 inches, probably 25% of your roots for those trees are going to be severed. So you want to be really careful installing these on existing trees. But if you have a new planting, those roots will simply go underneath that wire. But some will go through the wire and will eventually get cut off. You can use chemical repellents, say that for me.
Spray repellents. Repellents are applied with either brush or spray. Is that what you're talking about?
Thank you. I just couldn't spit that one out. I don't know what's going on. My mouth stopped working. All right. So again, heavy rains, you got to reapply. You have to mix it up and make sure that you're not putting repellents on plants for human consumption unless they are approved for plants for human consumption. You can trap them. They need to be placed where the rabbits are known to feed or rest, and place them close to the fence or shrub rows so that they'll feel more secure. They're very difficult to go into traps in a large open area.
Right. And bucks do also like to damage trees, which we didn't really talk about. So that protective barrier on newly planted trees on the bark, for deer, it's going to have to be pretty high. They're probably talking, 6 feet?
Well, it also depends on the height of the tree. The bucks are typically going to prefer a tree which has about a 2 to 4 inch diameter, no bigger than that. So once they're bigger than that, they're pretty safe. But then we're talking about rutting season, or when they're trying to get the velvet off of their horns, and they definitely cause a lot of problem. Yeah, I know I said it wrong.
No, it's fine. I was just, but so that is one aspect of deer damage that we really didn't touch on. But let's go ahead and switch gears for a second and talk about trees, if that's all right.
Oh, I always want to talk about trees, Dan.
I didn't think it'd be a problem, but here, all right. So what has been kind of the tree disease that I've probably been called to the most these past couple weeks? And it's something that people are noticing now that I'm also kind of wary that it was something that has been around for a long time. Especially, so let's talk about maple trees. Maple trees, very nice shade trees, planted in many areas. They get very large. But what people are seeing is that the maple trees that they have, that these wonderful shade trees, are starting to lose their canopy, and you'll start to see you'll see dead branches sticking up from above the canopy, and you'll see some canopy dieback. So you'll have some defoliation. Some people are noticing that the leaves on their maple trees are turning. Instead of turning in September, they're changing colors for the fall early on because the plant's so stressed. So one of the things that we have seen out there, and people are starting to make notice of this, and I'm wondering if it's because of the ash trees that are all dying out there. People are starting to see these dead trees, and then they go home, Karen, and they look at their landscape, and they're like, you know what? My maple trees are starting to look like that ash tree that died, because now people know what to look for. So they're starting to see it. And this is what the disease or the category is called maple decline. And it's called maple decline because they haven't exactly pinpointed what causes it. They're leaning more towards plant stress. So we're kind of, once it's happening, another indicator that a tree is in maple decline, or maple tree is in maple decline, is that when you start looking at the nodes at the base of the plant, so you find a green branch and you can see yearly growth. You'll start to notice that instead of the yearly growth is less than 5 centimeters, which is a sign that the tree is in trouble. It's really not growing as large as it should. And you can go back several years with a small branch and figure out how this declines, and if it is maple decline, how it's progressively slowed down the aging of the tree, the growth of the tree, and also you can every year what you'll see is greater defoliation to the point where typically a secondary disease comes in and finishes the tree off.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about what we do to kill our lovely trees. All right, so this is most frequently an issue in urban and suburban areas where you see maple decline. And maple decline typically is a conjunction of a lot of different issues at hand. So in an urban and suburban area, we typically give a tree very little soil to grow in. Okay, so it already is stressed because it's not getting the nutrients it really wants to have, and it's not allowed to spread its roots as far as it really wants to give itself proper support. So there's your number one stressor.
Because of that nice driveway.
Well, yeah, the nice driveway, a nice sidewalk, whatever. So, okay, there's your number one issue. So when you're planting a tree, if you are planting it near a paved area or an area that will be paved, look into perhaps using a constructed soil or putting a culvert underneath the paved area to allow the roots a place to expand into. That will prevent your sidewalk or driveway from heaving, which is a huge issue in urban and suburban areas. So that's step one.
Or another way to look at it is this. If you want to put a driveway where there is a large tree next to it, and you don't want that tree to cause some damage to your driveway, then maybe cut it down and plant something smaller there so it doesn't mess up your
right concrete. So right tree, right place. That's a very important thing to consider.
I mean, and you can manipulate it both ways, which is important. People get very attached to trees,
which understandably so.
And you know what? That's great. But they do grow back, and the sooner you put a smaller tree in there, the sooner it'll get large too.
And another thing you need to consider is if you are putting in a driveway where you have a beautiful tree, and this happens a lot with new home sites, okay? Now you select a home site which has big, beautiful trees on it, and they build their house and save these big, beautiful trees. But what they don't do is they don't prevent the root systems of these big, beautiful trees from being compacted by that heavy machinery as the home is being built. And so 5-10 years pass, and all those big, beautiful trees are now dead. Well, that's because you didn't properly protect them during the home construction process. If you would like to maintain a tree, you cannot disturb the root system within the drip canopy. So look to where the edge of the canopy comes down and the shade at noon, and draw a circle in the ground. And that is the area you should not be disturbing. So if you're building a home, installing a driveway, putting in a sidewalk, putting in a cable, buried utility line, whatever it is, if you disturb that root zone, expect to see serious decline in your tree. You cannot have a tree unless it has roots. That roots are the only way a tree can absorb water, and you know that if you can't drink water, you're not going to last so long. The same happens with a tree.
That's right. And I just kind of want to clarify that the shadow at noon is basically the edge of the branches.
Yes, that's called the drip line.
I know. But I mean, you don't have to wait till noon to find out where the drip line is if you just walk out to the edge of the branch. That's all I want to say.
That's fine. That works too.
Yeah. So just at the that's right. So the roots that are closest to a tree, the big ones, those are mainly support roots. And then you have the drip line is where... Because if you think about it, the water isn't really, if you go underneath a tree in a storm, you're not really getting rained on. So the tree is going to absorb most things from the outside roots, then the living roots, not so much the support structures.
All right. So off of each of those support structure roots come a lot of little feeder roots. Okay, so the feeder roots are what are absorbing all of the nutrients, doing all of the hard work of converting those stored sugars back into growth energy, and also absorbing the water. So now the trick is the root system of that tree is going to go well beyond the drip canopy, and that's where the majority of the feeder roots are. This is very true. However, those feeder roots won't create more structural roots, but the structural roots can create more feeder roots. And so that's why it's really essential to protect that central area. So another thing, that compaction, I want to go back to because it's extremely important. When that heavy machinery or your car or your lawnmower, after it's been raining for a few days, any of those things are going to slowly compact or quickly compact that soil. And not only does that prevent water from getting to the root system, but it also prevents oxygen. And oxygen, believe it or not, is needed by trees because the oxygen in the soil is what's responsible for converting those sugars back into energy. And so if you don't have pore space in your soil, you cannot have water get to your tree or any other plant, and you cannot have oxygen get to your tree. And without those two things, the tree will die. And so what Dan had mentioned earlier was seeing the canopy change colors midsummer. And sorry, I'm on my soapbox now. All right, so when that canopy changes color midsummer instead of in the autumn, oftentimes what I say is the tree is dead. It just doesn't know it yet because that tree is in severe decline and it will die within the next 2 to 3 years if it doesn't die the next year. And so when a tree changes color early or it has smaller leaves than it normally does, like you were saying with the growth internodes being shorter, if it has smaller leaves than usual, that's also an indicator of severe decline. Another indicator is epicormic branching. So if you see branches coming out on the main trunk of the stem, the main trunk of the tree, that is a stress factor. So whenever you go through and you see a tree that's had its top cut out, you will automatically see epicormic branches because that is a severely stressful thing that is done to it, that we do to trees all the time. It's a horrible thing to do. I'll get on that soapbox another day. But again, that is a stress factor. All right. So what we're looking for when you see the tips of the branches dying back, you know that there is an issue going on. So like he was saying with the maples, you'll see the branches sticking out of the tops of these maple trees, but no leaves on them. And so that's an indicator of decline. So what can you do? All right. So hopefully your tree has not invited has not invited a secondary pest in yet, you're going to want to do everything you can to help that tree recover. So in a drought period where we get no water for 2 weeks or 1 week or more, you're going to want to water your tree. You're going to want to deep water. So what you're going to do is you're going to take, for every inch in diameter, you're going to get a 5-gallon bucket. You're going to drill 5 holes in that 5-gallon bucket of 1/8 of an inch or 1/4 of an inch. You're going to fill the bucket full of water and you're going to set it at the drip line of the tree. And for every inch of diameter, you're going to get another bucket. So if you have a 5-inch diameter tree, you're going to get 5 buckets. Or you can fill one bucket up 5 times and place it in 5 different places. That's fine, but that's called deep watering. It allows the soil to absorb the water slowly as opposed to just spraying it with a hose, which only gets the grass wet and does not help the tree at all.
Let's see. And the one other thing with the watering is that you don't want to overwater the plant, so you need to do this during the drought periods. So early in the summer when we're having plenty of rain, what would you say, like if you're having an inch of rain a week, that's probably adequate for the tree.
Yeah, and a mature tree typically isn't going to even need that much. You know, it's pulling its moisture from a lower point. However, when we do have drought conditions, say it gets really dry, the soil starts cracking open, things like that are good indicators that you need to start watering your tree. And you will need to do it once a week. And for a younger tree, you're going to water it more frequently than that. Now, the trick is, again, like Dan said, if it's too wet, that can be stressful as well. So you do not want to water a tree if we're having regular rains.
Right. And other times that it's great to water a tree is when that tree is not established yet. So first year plantings that you just put in there early in the springtime, those trees don't have those the support roots are there, but those other nutrient gathering feeder roots, aren't fully developed yet in that area because they were they could have been broken. So watering trees, saplings, young trees, especially the first year that you transplanted them, it's going to be really important.
Yeah, and again, it's essential not to water right up against the trunk. You want to water out at the drip line because that is going to encourage the feeder roots to expand out further and give you more drought resistance in the future.
And you were saying for every inch of diameter of the trunk, it's a gallon bucket?
A 5-gallon bucket.
5-gallon bucket. So per inch of diameter. So we're just looking at the diameter of the trunk itself. So take a vertical line and measure from
right. And so with trees, we measure, it's called diameter at breast height. So find your chest level. It's 4.5 feet above the ground for most people. And that's where you're going to measure the width of your tree. And so you can just, you can eyeball it. It doesn't have to be perfect, but a big tree is definitely going to need more water. And so you're talking, 5 gallons. If you have a 5-inch tree, that's 5 times 5. That's 25 gallons of water.
Yeah, just kind of take a ruler out there and just kind of approximate the diameter of that trunk. But for the smaller trees, we're probably talking no more than 2 inches of that trunk diameter. So not a whole lot of water, but very important to do, especially when it's newly transplanted and we're going through that drought period. So yeah, do remember that drip line. Drip line is essential because that is where all the nutrients are being uptaken, and that is also where all the water is being uptaken, which the tree needs to get established to begin with. Yeah, so we did talk about maple decline. So some of the symptoms of maple decline, again, you'll start to see that the plants are basically going to start defoliating from the outside in. So you'll start seeing dead branches peek up above the canopy. You'll start to see branches coming up from the trunk, and you'll start to see that early small inner nodes. So smaller growth every year until the plant essentially dies. And you'll also see early leaf color change this July-August period. So keep your eye out for that. And if you do have questions on that, you can call me at Dan Lima with OSU Extension in Belmont County, 740-695-1455.
Or Karen Cox at WVU Extension in Ohio County at 304-234-3673.
Thanks for listening to Extension Calling. This show is a collaboration between OSU Belmont County Extension Educator Dan Lima and WVU Ohio County Extension Agent Karen Cox. If you'd like a transcript of this show, contact us at the office. Also, let us know if you enjoy the show by ranking us on your podcast app.